I think this will be a really fascinating topic because you're on a journey.
We are.
And maybe before we go to that journey, a little bit about Ubisoft, and my son loves Assassin's Creed, but maybe just paint the picture of the market. People may not fully realize the complexity of your business model.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks, Bill. So I joined Ubisoft just 2 years ago, actually. We're a French gaming company. We're 20,000 people globally. We have about 35, 40 different studios that range from 3,500 people in Montreal. It's the largest gaming studio in the world, to small mobile studios of 20 people. Gaming is a really interesting industry to be in. I've spent my career in tech, but Ubisoft is my first venture into gaming. It's really at the intersection of creativity and technology. Very particular talent. It's also an industry that has just exploded over the last few years. So gaming is now a bigger industry than music and film combined. And the acceleration that Josh was talking about yesterday during COVID and the pandemic to digitalization, well, that happened like double in gaming as everyone was stuck home and needed to play Assassin's Creed or another one of our brands. So it's been quite a journey over the last 2 years, and in particular, with the Great Resignation, we've just seen an explosion of attrition. And as a French family-founded company, we'd never had that before. We'd had attrition that was, single-digit for 30 years, and even less when it came to our top talent.
Yeah, maybe just a little side note, because I learned this when I was actually on the campus of the University of Southern California a couple of years ago, and we were taking a tour of their cancer research center. And they were looking at trillions of data points around cancer and how does that impact the cell and metastasize in the body. And we're in this $300 million research center, and sitting next to the scientists were students that were from the cinema school, and they were gamers. And it's like, why would you have gamers and cinema school people with worrying about prostate cancer, right? And they said, listen, Bill, we're dealing with trillions of bits of data, and they know how to render it. So they will take all that data and they will create a visual world that our researchers then can go into it. So I just wanted to call out the level of sophistication in your industry that most people, it's not just an Atari game anymore.
No.
It is complex.
It's more complex than creating blockbuster films. A game to release today takes on average 5 to 7 years to build. Could have up to 1,000 people working on it at one time. Cost upward of 200, 300 million, because you have this combination of technology, a narrative, sometimes a whole new world that is created, characters, and into that you have to lay gameplay, you have to make it interesting, you have to have levels. And now, of course, over the last few years, it's all about being online, it's all about being multiplayer. So you have to make that work for literally thousands, maybe millions of people concurrently all around the world at the same time.
Yeah, no, yesterday we were sitting at a roundtable discussion with a bunch of other CHROs really talking about the shortage of talent. And we get asked on the Josh Burson side that question quite a bit. And so we actually went back to the kind of the dawn of the industrial age, and we started 1900 just for argument's sake. And you saw this like abundance of talent in the 1900s all the way through the early 2000s. In fact, we talked about the McKinsey research report. How many folks here remember the war for talent, like right around 1994 and 95? That was an incredible research report, and it predicted that the number of people available for jobs was going to continue to shrink. What it didn't predict was the scarcity of talent, that we'd actually have more jobs than people. And we were talking about that, and that changes the rules a little bit. How did it change the rules for what you do?
It absolutely changed the rules, and I think again, in the last couple of years, it's been such a disruptor because so many people, so many companies, and so much money has flooded into gaming. So we now not only have our traditional competitors that we're dealing with for talent, but also new entrants. Facebook is doing games, Netflix is doing games, people that have very, very deep pockets and access to great technology talent. So we had to completely rethink, actually, how we could attract people, because our value proposition was just not based on the same economic model as some of the new entrants that we were dealing with, that we were competing against for talent. And we had talent that was leaving us for the first time.
Yeah, no, what's interesting, everybody in this room, if you're at Cultivate, you get it and you believe in it. But obviously that had to be a conversation in the company, and you've chosen Eightfold, you're just at the beginning of the journey, right?
Yeah.
Can you back us up a little bit and maybe tell us about some of the conversations, some of the doubts? How did you get around them? How did you pivot the organization to make this decision?
So it really started with that talent retention issue, to be honest. So when we looked at the data and tried to understand, what can we do about this? We can't match the kind of packages that the competitors are putting in front of our talent. They were literally doubling, sometimes tripling their compensation. But when we looked at the exit data that we had, when we looked at our engagement survey and correlated that against the people that had left, what we saw, in addition to compensation, was career opportunities and career growth. And what was most interesting, actually, was the data in our engagement survey. So compensation was the lowest scoring question, but it's usually the lowest scoring question. And we saw that for leavers, actually, there wasn't much differentiation. But when we looked at questions around career growth and career opportunity, they were 20 points lower for people that had left in the last 6 months than for people that were there. So that was a real differentiator. The other side of the coin, of course, was around attraction, and realizing that talent scarcity meant that we weren't going to be able to recruit ourselves out of this problem. Right? We just were not going to be able to recruit enough people to replace those that were leaving. And so we realized that we really had to look at the internal talent that we had to figure out, one, how we could provide them opportunities so they would stay, but secondly, so we could build the skills that we actually needed for the future.
It's interesting. In our role, we read everybody's research out there because it's always fascinating. And LinkedIn did a study probably October-ish of last year, and they went out and looked at 1 million people that had switched jobs. And they asked them a really simple question: why did you do it? And the number one answer by like 83% of the respondents, the number one answer was career growth. They were moving to another job because they felt in their current organization they couldn't get that career growth. And if I'm hearing you correctly, that's exactly what you're facing.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And then if that's true, then the follow-on question is, there's lots of things that you can do from a career growth perspective. You can have more training. You can have more schools. You can have more apprenticeship. You can have a lot of things. But in your analysis, you ended up around skills. How did you get there?
We ended up around skills and this idea of internal mobility, and really thinking about your skills as currency within the organization. Gaming is, again, an industry that's being disrupted and is being disrupted. All the talk around AI and some of the other Web3 technologies, it's completely changing the whole business model, the whole way that we create games, and the kind of skills that not just our technology people need, our programmers, our developers, but also our creative talent need. You look at generative AI and the fact that we now have machines that can draw beautiful pictures, can create whole mood boards and open worlds instead of having artists that sit down and do it. So we still need the artists, but we just need them to be able to use the technology so they can produce a mood board, or they can produce a picture of a character in a game much, much faster than if they were sitting there doing it by hand.
What's interesting in our research, and Kathy's right here in the front row, and we kind of came to this aha when she was using the Eightfold data in our Global Workforce Intelligence project around healthcare. And in healthcare, nursing is a critical shortage. You've heard it multiple times from us, but here's the insight that, one of the things I'm hoping you take away from this session, and that is, if you accept the fact that human beings are scarce relative to the number of jobs, if you have a human being doing something, they should be doing what is uniquely human, right? That the machine can't do. And one of the ways that they describe that in the medical profession is really working at the top of your license. So if you have a human being here, how do we make sure that they're doing that creative part that the machine can't do, but really kind of closes the connection on that? When you think about your talent structure and where you're going to place humans and, and the scarcity of talent, how are you thinking about all that?
So I guess there's a couple of things. When we think about top of license, as you say, that's making sure that our creative people, as an example, are actually spending time on being creative. And it was interesting, the research I think that came out in one of the presentations earlier, I think it was the Deloitte team, that was talking about how much time people spend today in meetings, how much time they spend on conference calls, how much that time they spend on work about work. And we're a 20,000 person organization. We've, like every other company, have been through this journey of shifting to remote and hybrid working. And that's added an enormous amount of overhead in the production cycle around games. So if we can figure out a way that we can remove some of that, and we can actually get our creative people back to focusing on what they do best, which is being creative, then I think we would have answered the million-dollar question, Bill.
There you go. And, just as a side note, I came out of 23 years as a Deloitte partner, and I can attest to the fact that we have a lot of conference calls, and they don't add a lot of value to anything, right? But we spend a lot of time on the phone talking to each other. One of the other things, you talked about internal mobility. Mm-hmm. And it's fascinating because the last couple of years, every company's out there going, we're going to do internal mobility. We've got it. It's important. And then doing what we uniquely do is we go check the data. And so we've got a relationship with AMS, one of the big outsourcers, and they gave us access to 500,000 data points of hires inside of a bunch, anonymized of course, across a variety of industries globally. And guess how many jobs were internal mobility? 11%. So we may be talking a game that we really need to do this, but in reality, only 11% of jobs are actually filled through internal mobility. The rest is the traditional, I'm going to put a job rec, I'm going to go out there, interview 100%. Somebody, and see what happens.
100%. And I think, gaming is an industry that is very much a cult of the individual, yep. Right? And it's a very insular industry. It's a little bit like musical chairs. Like people just move from like one gaming company to another. It's very hard to break in, even as a technologist, if you haven't had experience in gaming. And so when our hiring managers are looking to add capability, it's not just the technical capability you're looking for, but it's have they shipped a game? Right? Do they understand this culture? What kinds of genre have they worked on? And so you're constantly looking for these like purple unicorns that don't exist. So no, today we do not do a lot of internal mobility. The reflex is to go and try and hire, and we spend a lot of money and have a lot of recruiters and have very long hiring cycles because of some of the niche talent that we're trying to bring in. So I think the eightfold journey for us will actually be a big transformation of how we think about talent, how we manage talent, and how we help our leaders and our people managers really think about the value of our internal talent, how they can value the fact that people understand the culture, that they know how to get stuff done in a very relationship-based organization, how to value and assess for things like learning agility. And hopefully using eightfold, better understanding the skills that we have and the transparency or transability of some of those skills across different roles in the organization.
And what's your thought on this? Because every time we do a study on this, we always find that there's actually more talent on your balance sheet than you realize. Is that kind of one of your hypotheses, that you've got talent that's just hidden inside the organization?
Absolutely. And I think, again, we get so focused on trying to go and find this hugely scarce talent outside rather than starting to look within. So a great example, actually, has been the area of monetization. So the whole industry in gaming is shifting, and people are buying less games. The market is still growing, but they're buying less physical games. Instead, they're buying subscriptions that gives them access to a Netflix opportunity of different games, or they're spending money within the game, in-game spending. And so that means that we've had to develop a whole new skill set around monetization, right? How do you get a game that's actually free to play on your mobile or on a device? You get it out in the market, and then you earn from either the subscription deal that you might have with a provider, or through the in-game purchases that people are making. And it's a really rare skill to find. You can find quite a lot of monetization skills in places like China, but it's difficult to get people to come and work in Paris or Montreal from China. And so we've had to think about how can we develop some of these skills internally. Can our finance people actually develop these rare skills? Can we help figure out how we can take some of our data analysts and maybe have them move into a monetization? So we have to tap into that untapped talent within the organization, because we're just not going to be able to find it externally.
That's fascinating, and that answer is very similar to, I think every organization is trying to find the talent that's really locked up on their balance sheet. I had the privilege of coming down a few weeks ago, and I'm going to connect some dots here. Mm-hmm. And Zabi over here, raise your hand because I'm going to make you a hero. So this is the gentleman who gave me these numbers. As you get older, you can only remember a couple of numbers at a time, but I've got 3 numbers for you that if you're really trying to educate those stakeholders in your organization around, why should I do this? Right? Why is skill so important? Let me give you 3 numbers that Eightfold found in analyzing, I believe, millions of resumes that were uploaded and doing a little bit of number crunching behind the scenes and going, aha, there's a story here. Here are the 3 numbers I'll share with you. So the first one is 5. So for every 5 skills that an individual self-identifies, so I write my resume, let's say I put 5 skills on there, and I upload it, that's who I think I am. But you know what? The minute Eightfold touches that, it does something with it. It says, oh, I know Bill Pelster. In addition to those 5 skills, I can see his entire history because that's just what AI and Eightfold does. He actually has 12 more skills that we can infer because he worked with Kathy together at Deloitte many years ago on these projects, and Kathy has these skills. They're similar. Maybe Bill has these skills. So I've just gone from a definition of 5 to, I only have 10 fingers, so I can't, the model doesn't quite work, but I go from 5 to 12, and then on top of that, and I think this is really interesting as you're branching into new areas, it identifies another 15 adjacent skills that with just a little bit of effort from the L&D organization, you can make the leap from where you're at today with your legacy skills to this new skill. So as you're out there in the organization and as you're looking at kind of new business models, this 5, 12, 15, backed up by millions of data points from resumes that have been uploaded, is one of the most powerful stories that I've found to really communicate the importance here. I don't know if you've got thoughts on that or anything that you'd like to add.
But I think that's exactly with the example I was giving on monetization that we've understood. And we're actually really excited to start the implementation with Eightfold and actually dig into some of those hypotheses, discover where the skills are and figure out how we can try and upskill and reskill people on some of these new career paths.
I want to switch a little bit. So you've gone through this process, you've identified the need that the skills is really important. Your business is under as much challenge as every other business out there, and you've selected Eightfold and you're about ready to start. Mm-hmm. Where are you starting? How are you thinking about this? What's the journey ahead? Can you give us a little bit of that?
Yeah. So there's been quite a lot of I would say pushback within the organization because historically we're talent hoarders. Again, I think there's a huge amount of pressure that is put on individuals to play a differentiated part of building, delivering, or operating a blockbuster game. And so our managers, our MDs, have been very, very reluctant to let people move throughout the organization. And there's a big fear that, particularly as we kind of open the doors and let people see the opportunities, we'll put critical projects, critical games at risk. So we're addressing that very upfront and very head-on. We're taking a very phased and deliberate implementation path. We're starting small, low risk, within a single project, and then across multiple projects in one studio, across multiple studios within one country, and then finally a global implementation. And at each step of the way, we'll have criteria that we've agreed with our MDs that we need to meet in order to move to the next phase. And if not, we need to go back and test it again before we're ready to move. So I think the biggest issue we have is, it's not the tool. The tool is beautiful. The tool is easy to use. The tool will be great. The issue we have is the behavioral change that we're trying to drive. It's a completely different mindset around how we think about talent development, how we staff our employees, how we build our teams. And it's much more talent and people-led than traditionally the organization has been. And that's why we need to move so slowly.
And if you don't mind, I'm going to double click on one more kind of question that always comes up, and that is the phased approach is wonderful, logical, it mitigates risk, but you had to choose who to start with first.
Yeah.
Did you start with a critical business issue? Did you start with an MD that was really open-minded and willing to partner with you on it? Was it a combination of the two? Was it other criteria? How did you choose your first kind of rollout or potential partner?
So we've actually, the very first thing we're piloting with is actually our IT organization. And that's a business-driven problem we're trying to solve because we need to reduce our IT organization today. And so combining that with the possibility to redeploy some of our IT technology-skilled people within technology roles in our studios that are developing games is really the first way, the first proof point that we'll have around the model and around the tool.
And are those proof points around retention, around engagement scores? Are there other business metrics that are kind of lurking in the background that you're looking to connect this all to?
So there's definitely one around attrition and retention, I should say, because that's kind of where we started. There's also something around time to fill. It takes us, again, an enormous amount of time today to be able to fill some of these niche roles. And so I really believe that this will shorten and reduce the cost for how we can get quickly talent deployed where it needs to be.
No, that is great. Any closing comments from your side just to kind of wrap us up on this journey? And would love maybe in a year to see how the first kind of steps actually transpired with you.
I think, as you mentioned, it is really early on in this journey, and I'm excited about what's ahead. I'm also excited because HR is really playing a very early role in helping to adopt and implement AI within the organization. So I feel quite privileged, actually, that we're kind of running with this, and we're showing other parts of the business, our production teams, but also other corporate functions, how we can start to use this technology in a way that benefits our business, but also our people.
Great, and probably the most important question, especially if you're a gamer, is there a discount code for Assassin's Creed or anything from Ubisoft? So
no, there is none. I'm sorry.
There we go. All right, hey everyone, thank you very much. Hopefully you enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.